"We're better as friends," she said when I tried to set boundaries. I thought she meant it, so I treated her like any other casual friend, and apparently, that wasn't what she had in mind. Looking back, I should have realized that someone who says one thing but expects another was never going to be satisfied with simple friendship. I met Riley 3 years ago at O'Malley's pub during their Tuesday trivia night, where I was desperately trying to remember the capital of Montenegro while nursing a pint of their local IPA. She was at the next table over, confidently shouting Podgorica to her teammates, and I couldn't help but be impressed by someone who actually knew obscure European geography. We started chatting after the game, discovered we both worked in Portland's downtown district, me as a municipal engineering consultant specializing in water treatment systems, her managing digital marketing campaigns for boutique hotels along the Columbia River. What began as friendly conversation over shared appetizers evolved into regular coffee meetups at Stumptown and weekend adventures through the Saturday market, browsing handcrafted goods from local artisans. I genuinely enjoyed Riley's company during those early months. She was sharp, funny, and shared my appreciation for Portland's quirky culture, from food truck festivals to underground music venues in converted warehouses. Our friendship felt natural and uncomplicated, the kind of easy companionship where you could spend hours talking about everything from municipal zoning laws to her latest hotel marketing campaigns without any underlying tension or expectations. We'd grab lunch at the Mediterranean Place near Pioneer Courthouse Square, attend outdoor concerts in Laurelhurst Park, and occasionally catch late-night movies at the historic Hollywood Theater, always splitting checks and maintaining the comfortable dynamic of genuine platonic friends. I valued that friendship precisely because it was straightforward, no games, no hidden agendas, just two people who enjoyed each other's company without romantic complications. Riley seemed to appreciate this too, at least initially, often mentioning how refreshing it was to have a male friend who didn't immediately try to turn friendship into something romantic like so many guys she'd encountered through her marketing work. She'd share stories about awkward dating app experiences and overly persistent hotel clients who mistook professional courtesy for personal interest, and I'd offer the perspective of someone who genuinely cared about her well-being without ulterior motives. But somewhere around the 6-month mark, I started noticing subtle changes in Riley's behavior that made me increasingly uncomfortable, though I initially dismissed them as my imagination running wild. During our coffee dates, she began sitting closer than necessary, her hand lingering on my arm when she laughed at my terrible engineering jokes about concrete tensile strength and municipal permit processing delays. She started making comments about how connected we were, how she'd never met anyone who got her the way I did, and how rare it was to find such deep understanding between friends. The casual touches became more frequent and deliberate, a hand on my shoulder when she leaned over to look at something on my phone, fingers brushing mine when she handed me my coffee, hugs that lasted just a few seconds longer than comfortable friendship typically warranted. She began suggesting activities that felt more date-like than friend hangouts, like evening wine tastings in intimate downtown cellars or sunrise hikes to romantic viewpoints overlooking the Willamette River Valley where couples typically went to watch the sunset together. When other people joined our group activities, Riley would position herself next to me consistently, making subtle comments about our special bond that left others assuming we were romantically involved despite my attempts to clarify our platonic status. I started feeling like I was walking through a minefield of mixed signals, never quite sure if I was misreading normal friendship behavior or if Riley was indeed pushing boundaries we'd never officially established. The breaking point came when I gently suggested we should probably maintain clearer boundaries since we were friends and not romantically involved, explaining that I valued our friendship too much to let romantic confusion complicate what we'd built together. Riley laughed off my concerns with a dismissive wave of her hand, insisting that our connection was just really deep friendship energy and that I was overthinking our natural chemistry. She claimed that some people were just naturally more affectionate than others, and that I shouldn't read anything romantic into what she considered normal expressions of close platonic bonds between mature adults. Her response made me feel like I was being overly sensitive or misinterpreting innocent behavior, but something about her reaction didn't quite ring true. There was a flicker of something in her eyes that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. The situation became more complex when Riley started sending me late-night texts that walked the line between friendly and romantic, messages like, "Thinking about our conversation today and how much I appreciate having someone who really listens," or, "Wish more people understood me the way you do," accompanied by heart emojis that felt inappropriate for purely platonic communication. I found myself screenshotting these messages to study them later, trying to determine if I was misinterpreting friendly affection or if Riley was indeed testing the boundaries we'd supposedly established for our platonic relationship. The truth about Riley's intentions became crystal clear during a group hangout at her apartment in the Pearl District, where she'd invited our usual crowd for homemade pizza and board games on a rainy Saturday evening in October. I'd brought a bottle of local Pinot Noir and was looking forward to a relaxing night with friends, completely unprepared for what I was about to discover about Riley's true feelings and manipulative behavior behind my back. About halfway through the evening, while we were debating the rules of Settlers of Catan and Riley had gotten up to refill everyone's wine glasses from the kitchen, her phone lit up on the coffee table with what appeared to be a text conversation. I wasn't intentionally snooping. The screen was facing up and the notification appeared right in front of me while I was reaching for my own phone to check the time. What I saw made my stomach drop and fundamentally changed how I understood our entire friendship dynamic. The message thread was between Riley and someone named Sage, and the preview text read something like, "He's definitely starting to come around, just need to be patient with the whole boundaries thing." I felt a cold realization wash over me as I processed what this might mean, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on a single out-of-context message fragment. However, when Riley returned from the kitchen and noticed her phone screen was still illuminated, she quickly grabbed it with a slightly panicked expression that confirmed my worst suspicions about what I'd accidentally glimpsed. The rest of the evening felt surreal as I tried to act normal while processing the implications of what I'd seen, watching Riley interact with the group and wondering how much of her behavior toward me had been calculated manipulation rather than genuine friendship confusion. After everyone else left around midnight, I decided to address what I'd seen directly rather than letting my imagination run wild with speculation and assumption about her motivations. I told Riley I'd accidentally seen part of her text conversation and asked if she wanted to explain what she'd meant about me coming around and the boundaries discussion we'd had weeks earlier. Instead of offering a reasonable explanation or apologizing for any misunderstanding, Riley became immediately defensive and tried to deflect responsibility by claiming I was violating her privacy by reading her personal messages. She insisted that I was taking a casual comment to her roommate completely out of context and making it into something much more significant than it actually was. But when I pressed her for clarification about what she'd actually meant, Riley's story began falling apart under scrutiny. She admitted that she'd been discussing our friendship with Sage, her best friend and roommate, but claimed she'd only been expressing confusion about mixed signals she thought I was sending. According to Riley's version of events, I was the one who'd been flirting and pushing boundaries, and she'd been trying to figure out how to handle my supposedly obvious romantic interest without damaging our friendship. The gaslighting was so blatant and ridiculous that I almost laughed. Here was someone who'd been touching me inappropriately, sending romantic texts, and creating intimate situations, now claiming that I was the one pursuing her romantically. When I pointed out the specific examples of her boundary-crossing behavior over the past several months, Riley dismissed each incident as either my misinterpretation of normal friendly affection or my imagination reading romantic intent into innocent interactions between platonic friends. She insisted that everything I'd perceived as flirtation was actually just her natural personality and communication style, and that I'd been projecting my own romantic feelings onto our friendship dynamic. The conversation reached its breaking point when I asked Riley directly what she wanted from our relationship and whether she'd been hoping it would develop into something romantic despite her claims about preferring friendship boundaries. That's when she delivered the line that would define everything that happened next, looking me straight in the eye with a mixture of frustration and condescension that made her true feelings perfectly clear. She told me that we were better as friends and that I shouldn't make things weird by pushing for something she'd never wanted in the first place. Riley insisted that I was misreading signals that had never existed and that our friendship was perfectly fine the way it was, as long as I stopped creating romantic tension where none was intended. The irony was absolutely staggering. the same person who'd been systematically testing boundaries and sending mixed signals was now positioning herself as the victim of my romantic pursuit, rewriting the entire history of our interactions to cast me as the inappropriate one. But her defensive reaction and obvious panic when I'd seen those messages told me everything I needed to know about what had really been happening. Riley had been playing some kind of game where she wanted the emotional intimacy and attention of a romantic relationship while maintaining the safety and control of friendship boundaries, and she'd been discussing her strategy for winning me over with her roommate like it was some kind of project or conquest. I realized in that moment that Riley didn't actually want clear boundaries or genuine friendship. She wanted me to pursue her romantically so she could either accept or reject my advances while maintaining complete control over the situation. The fact that I tried to maintain appropriate boundaries had apparently frustrated her enough that she'd been working behind the scenes to manipulate me into making the first move. Standing there in her apartment, looking at someone I genuinely cared about as a friend, I made a decision that would prove more satisfying than I could have imagined at the time. If Riley truly believed we were better as friends and wanted me to stop making things weird, then I would give her exactly what she claimed to want. From that moment forward, I would treat Riley exactly like any other casual friend in my social circle, polite, pleasant, but without any of the special attention or emotional investment I'd been giving to what I'd mistakenly thought was a close friendship. 3 weeks after my confrontation with Riley, I found myself at a coffee roasting workshop in Southeast Portland that she'd ironically invited me to attend as part of our friend group's monthly cultural activities. The irony wasn't lost on me that Riley was still trying to maintain our social dynamic while simultaneously denying the romantic undertones she'd been cultivating for months. I decided to attend the workshop anyway, partly because I was genuinely interested in learning about coffee roasting techniques and partly because I refused to let Riley's manipulation change my own social patterns or interests. The workshop was being held at a small artisanal roastery near Hawthorne Boulevard, where a dozen participants were learning about bean selection, roasting profiles, and the chemistry behind creating the perfect cup of coffee from a bearded instructor who treated coffee beans like precious gemstones. About halfway through the session, while I was taking notes on roasting temperatures and timing intervals, a woman with short auburn hair and paint-stained fingernails asked if she could partner with me for the hands-on portion of the workshop. She introduced herself as Sage, mentioning that she was there because her roommate had recommended the class but had canceled at the last minute due to work obligations. Something about her direct communication style and genuine enthusiasm for learning immediately caught my attention. Here was someone who seemed refreshingly straightforward after months of dealing with Riley's mixed signals and manipulation tactics. Sage turned out to be a freelance pottery instructor who taught classes at various studios around Portland, and her passion for artisanal crafts resonated with my own appreciation for skilled manual work and attention to detail that I brought to my engineering projects. During our coffee tasting session, we discovered a shared love of outdoor rock climbing adventures around the Columbia River Gorge, particularly the challenging routes near Multnomah Falls where technical skill mattered more than expensive gear or social media photo opportunities. She had this wonderful way of asking thoughtful questions about my municipal engineering work, showing genuine curiosity about water treatment processes and infrastructure planning rather than the polite disinterest most people displayed when I mentioned my profession. I found myself genuinely attracted to Sage's independent spirit and creative energy, appreciating how she never played psychological games or sent mixed signals about her intentions or interests. When the workshop ended and we were all sampling our freshly roasted beans, Sage mentioned that she was planning to check out a new art supply store that had opened in the Alberta Arts District and asked if I'd like to join her since we seemed to have similar tastes in local craftsmanship and supporting small businesses. I accepted her invitation without hesitation, treating it as exactly what it appeared to be, a friendly invitation from someone whose company I enjoyed rather than trying to decode hidden meanings or romantic subtext that might not exist. Our impromptu art supply shopping trip turned into an afternoon of wandering through galleries and studios, discussing everything from ceramic glazing techniques to the engineering challenges of building sustainable infrastructure in earthquake-prone regions like the Pacific Northwest. Sage had this wonderful ability to find connections between seemingly unrelated topics, drawing parallels between the precision required in pottery wheel work and the mathematical calculations involved in designing water treatment systems that could serve growing urban populations. A week later, I ran into Sage again at the farmer's market downtown where I was buying fresh vegetables for my weekly meal prep routine, and she was purchasing clay supplies from a vendor who specialized in locally sourced materials for ceramic artists. She mentioned that she was planning to attempt some challenging climbing routes at Smith Rock State Park the following weekend and asked if I'd like to join her since I'd mentioned having experience with technical climbing during our previous conversation. I found myself looking forward to spending time with someone who shared my outdoor interests and appreciated honest communication without the exhausting psychological complexity that had characterized my friendship with Riley. During our climbing adventure at Smith Rock, Sage proved to be an excellent climbing partner who communicated clearly about safety protocols, shared gear generously, and celebrated successful routes without turning every accomplishment into a social media opportunity for validation from strangers online. We spent the entire day tackling challenging routes and sharing stories about past climbing adventures, near misses, and the mental discipline required to push through fear when you're hanging from a cliff face 40 feet above the ground. When Sage asked me out for dinner after our second chance encounter, this time at a small Ethiopian restaurant she'd been wanting to try, I accepted enthusiastically and treated it as a completely separate situation from my complicated history with Riley. I made sure to be completely transparent with Sage about my platonic relationship with Riley, explaining that we'd been friends for several years but had recently established clearer boundaries after some confusion about expectations and communication styles. I emphasized that I respected clear boundaries and valued honest communication in all my relationships, whether platonic or romantic, because I'd learned that mixed signals and hidden agendas only led to hurt feelings and damaged trust between people who cared about each other. Sage appreciated my directness and shared her own philosophy about the importance of authentic communication, mentioning that she'd ended previous relationships specifically because partners had expected her to read their minds or decode subtle hints rather than expressing their needs and feelings clearly like mature adults. Riley's behavior shifted dramatically when she discovered through our mutual friend network that Sage and I were dating, despite her previous emphatic insistence that we were better off maintaining just friends status and her accusations that I was making things weird by suggesting romantic undertones in our interactions. The irony was absolutely staggering. The same person who'd lectured me about respecting friendship boundaries was now clearly upset that I'd taken her advice and moved on to date someone who actually wanted a romantic relationship. Within days of our first official date, Riley began inserting herself into situations where she knew Sage and I would be spending time together, showing up unexpectedly at restaurants and venues around Portland with increasingly implausible explanations for her coincidental timing. She'd appear at the coffee shop where Sage and I had our regular Tuesday morning meetups, claiming she'd just happened to be in the neighborhood despite living and working on the opposite side of the city. When we attended outdoor concerts in Pioneer Courthouse Square, Riley would materialize during intermissions with friends I'd never met, positioning herself within our social circle and making passive-aggressive comments about compatibility and relationship timing that were clearly directed at our developing romance. Her favorite tactic was to approach us with a bright smile and artificial enthusiasm, asking detailed questions about our relationship timeline and making observations about how fast things were moving between us compared to the slow, deep connection she claimed we'd been building over our years of friendship. Riley started sharing carefully crafted stories with our mutual friends about my supposed romantic pursuit of her throughout our friendship, positioning herself as the victim of unrequited love who'd been forced to gently reject my advances while trying to preserve our platonic bond. According to her revised version of our friendship history, I'd been persistently pushing for a romantic relationship that she'd consistently discouraged, and my current relationship with Sage was obviously a rebound attempt to make her jealous and force her hand in reconsidering my romantic proposals. She told people that she felt terrible about having to hurt my feelings by maintaining appropriate boundaries, but that she'd always known I was hoping for more than friendship despite her clear communication about her platonic intentions. The gaslighting was so comprehensive and convincing that several mutual friends approached me with concern, asking if I was okay after being rejected by Riley and whether my relationship with Sage was healthy given the emotional timing involved. When I maintained my friendly but distant approach toward Riley, Treating her exactly as she had requested during our boundary-setting conversation, she accused me of being cold and abandoning the special connection we'd supposedly shared for years. She complained to anyone who would listen that I'd become a completely different person, that I was ignoring her in group settings and refusing to engage in the deep conversations that had characterized our friendship before Sage entered the picture. Riley seemed genuinely confused and hurt that I wasn't providing the emotional intimacy and special attention she'd grown accustomed to, despite being the person who'd insisted we maintain appropriate friendship boundaries and stop making things weird with romantic undertones. The irony wasn't lost on me that Riley wanted all the emotional benefits of a romantic relationship, the exclusive attention, the deep conversations, the prioritized treatment, while publicly maintaining that we were just friends and she had no romantic interest in me whatsoever. She wanted me to continue acting like a devoted boyfriend while she retained the freedom to date other people and deny any romantic connection between us when it suited her purposes. During group gatherings, Riley would make pointed comments about how some people couldn't handle rejection gracefully, how difficult it was when friends developed inappropriate feelings that had to be managed carefully, and how sad it was to watch someone throw away years of friendship over romantic disappointment. She'd position herself as the mature, rational person who was trying to preserve our friendship despite my emotional immaturity and inability to accept her clear boundaries. When these tactics failed to provoke the reaction she wanted, Riley escalated to more direct confrontations, approaching me at social events to ask why I was being so distant and whether I was punishing her for being honest about her feelings. She'd claimed that my behavior was hurting her deeply and that she missed the closeness we'd shared before things became complicated, conveniently forgetting that she was the person who'd created the complications by sending mixed signals and then denying responsibility for the confusion she'd deliberately cultivated. Sage found herself caught in an increasingly uncomfortable situation between her growing relationship with me and her loyalty to Riley, who had become dramatically more emotionally volatile about our dating since learning that her roommate was the woman I'd chosen to pursue romantically. The revelation that Sage was Riley's best friend and roommate had initially concerned me, but Sage assured me that she could handle any potential complications with maturity and clear communication rather than avoiding the situation entirely. However, Riley's reaction to discovering that her roommate was dating the man she'd been unsuccessfully trying to manipulate proved far more intense and irrational than either Sage or I had anticipated when we decided to pursue our relationship honestly. According to Sage, Riley had begun staging elaborate emotional breakdowns whenever she returned from dates with me, complete with tears, accusations of betrayal, and dramatic declarations about feeling abandoned by the two people she trusted most in her life. Riley would position herself in the living room of their shared apartment, strategically timing her emotional displays for maximum impact when Sage walked through the front door after spending time with me. She'd claimed that watching her best friend date someone who had supposedly led her on and broken her heart was causing her genuine psychological trauma that required immediate attention and comfort from Sage. Riley insisted that she felt betrayed not just by my rejection of her romantic advances, but by Sage's willingness to pursue a relationship with someone who had clearly manipulated both of them through calculated emotional games and boundary violations. She painted me as a master manipulator who had systematically played both women against each other, first pursuing her romantically and then switching to Sage when his original plan failed to produce the desired results. According to Riley's increasingly elaborate narrative, I was obviously using Sage to make her jealous and force her to reconsider her decision to maintain friendship boundaries rather than explore the romantic connection we'd supposedly been building together for years. She told Sage that any woman with self-respect would refuse to be part of such an obvious manipulation scheme, and that continuing to date me was essentially participating in psychological warfare against her closest friend. The emotional manipulation reached absurd levels when Riley started leaving strategically placed tissues around their apartment, claiming she'd been crying about our situation and playing melancholy music at volumes designed to ensure Sage would notice her distress. She'd time her most dramatic sobbing sessions for moments when she knew Sage was getting ready for dates with me, creating an atmosphere of guilt and tension that was clearly intended to sabotage our relationship before it could develop into something serious. When I suggested that Sage might want to spend more time at my apartment to avoid the toxic living situation Riley was creating, Sage insisted on handling the conflict maturely rather than simply avoiding it through avoidance tactics that might make the situation worse in the long run. She believed that Riley would eventually accept our relationship and move on once she realized that her emotional manipulation wasn't working and that neither Sage nor I was going to change our behavior based on her dramatic displays of supposed heartbreak. Riley escalated her manipulation tactics by threatening to move out and end their friendship unless Sage chose between their roommate relationship and her romance with me, positioning the situation as a loyalty test where Sage had to prove her commitment to their friendship by sacrificing her happiness for Riley's emotional comfort. She claimed that continuing to date me while living with her was causing her genuine psychological damage that made it impossible for her to function normally in her own home, and that Sage was being selfish and cruel by prioritizing a new romantic relationship over years of close friendship. The ultimatum was delivered with calculated precision during a moment when Sage was particularly stressed about work deadlines, with Riley crying and claiming she couldn't continue living in an environment where she was constantly reminded of her romantic rejection and supposed betrayal by the two people she loved most. When Sage refused to choose between our relationship and Riley's demands, explaining that mature adults should be capable of handling romantic disappointment without issuing ultimatums to their friends, Riley's behavior became even more erratic and manipulative. She started bringing random dates home specifically during times when she knew I would be visiting Sage, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere designed to make our relationship feel awkward and inappropriate within the shared living space. These weren't genuine romantic interests. They were obviously men she'd recruited from dating apps specifically to create drama and force confrontations that would make it impossible for Sage and me to enjoy peaceful time together in what should have been Sage's own home. Riley would make loud phone calls to these temporary dates while Sage and I were trying to have dinner or watch movies, discussing intimate details about her romantic life and making pointed comments about loyalty, trust, and people who steal their friends' romantic interests. She'd encourage her dates to monopolize the common areas of the apartment, playing loud music and engaging in obviously performative displays of affection that were clearly designed to make Sage and me uncomfortable rather than expressing genuine romantic interest in these random men she barely knew. 8 months into my relationship with Sage, Riley orchestrated what can only be described as a public ambush at the annual Portland Food Truck Festival, where she knew we would be celebrating our anniversary with a picnic lunch among the food vendors and live music stages that made the event one of our favorite summer traditions. Sage and I had spread a blanket in Peninsula Park near the main stage area, sharing Korean barbecue tacos and craft beer while listening to local bands perform covers of classic rock songs for families enjoying the sunny Saturday afternoon. We were laughing about something ridiculous that had happened during our morning pottery class when I noticed Riley approaching our picnic spot with obvious determination, her face already showing signs of the tears she'd apparently been preparing for this confrontation. She was walking directly toward us with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd been planning this scene carefully, probably rehearsing her lines and timing her emotional display for maximum public impact among the crowd of festival-goers enjoying their weekend. Riley positioned herself directly in front of our blanket and immediately launched into a loud, dramatic monologue about betrayal and stolen friendships that was clearly designed to attract attention from nearby families and couples who had no context for understanding the situation she was creating. With tears streaming down her face and her voice carrying across the festival grounds, she declared that I had systematically stolen her best friend and destroyed their sacred friendship bond through calculated manipulation and emotional abuse that had left her feeling isolated and abandoned. She accused me of targeting Sage specifically because I knew it would hurt Riley the most, claiming that I was obviously getting revenge for her rejection of my romantic advances by seducing her roommate and turning her against the person who had supported and cared for her for years. According to Riley's public narrative, I was a master manipulator who had used my knowledge of their friendship to drive a wedge between them, exploiting Sage's trusting nature and generous heart to punish Riley for maintaining appropriate boundaries in our supposedly platonic relationship. Riley demanded that Sage choose between their years of friendship and what she called my rebound relationship, with someone who obviously couldn't commit to anyone, given my pattern of pursuing multiple women simultaneously and playing emotional games with people who cared about me. She positioned herself as the victim of a coordinated attack on her emotional well-being, claiming that I had specifically chosen to date her best friend because I knew it would cause maximum psychological damage and force her to watch her romantic rejection play out in her own living space. The entire performance was delivered with the kind of theatrical intensity that would have been impressive if it weren't so obviously calculated and manipulative, complete with strategic pauses for dramatic effect and voice modulations designed to convey maximum emotional distress to our growing audience of concerned onlookers. I remained completely calm throughout Riley's public meltdown, letting her exhaust herself with accusations and demands while I simply stated that I was treating her exactly as she had requested during our boundary-setting conversation months earlier, as a friend, nothing more, nothing less. I explained to the crowd that had gathered around our picnic blanket that Riley and I had been friends who had discussed maintaining appropriate boundaries, and that I was simply respecting her stated preference for platonic relationships by not pursuing romantic involvement with her while dating someone else who actually wanted a romantic relationship with me. Sage defended our relationship's authenticity with remarkable composure, explaining that she and I had connected independently through shared interests and compatible personalities rather than through any scheme to hurt Riley or damage their friendship, and that mature adults should be capable of handling romantic disappointment without staging public scenes or issuing ultimatums to their friends. The contrast between Riley's emotional hysteria and our calm, rational responses was stark enough that several festival-goers began shaking their heads and walking away, clearly recognizing the situation for what it was: one person creating unnecessary drama while two others tried to handle it with dignity and maturity. Riley's confrontation attracted a significant crowd of curious onlookers who had initially approached with concern for what appeared to be a genuine emotional crisis, but gradually realized they were witnessing someone having a very public breakdown over relationship issues that could have been handled privately through adult conversation and conflict resolution. After her dramatic monologue failed to produce the reaction she wanted, Riley shifted tactics and began posting real-time updates to her social media accounts, crafting a one-sided narrative about betrayal and stolen love that painted herself as the innocent victim of coordinated emotional abuse by two people she had trusted with her deepest feelings and vulnerabilities. 1 year later, I proposed to Sage during a private pottery class at her favorite studio in Southeast Portland, where we created matching ceramic bowls together while discussing our shared vision for a future built on honest communication and mutual respect rather than manipulation and emotional games. The symbolism felt perfect: two people working with clay to create something beautiful and functional together, using our hands to shape raw materials into objects that would serve a practical purpose in our daily lives while representing the creative collaboration that had defined our relationship from the beginning. Sage said yes before I even finished asking the question, laughing through tears as she realized I'd coordinated with her pottery instructor to ensure we'd have privacy for the moment while still incorporating her artistic passion into what would become one of the most important memories of our lives together. We spent the rest of the evening planning our engagement party and discussing wedding details with the kind of excited anticipation that comes from two people who genuinely want to build a life together rather than trying to win some complex psychological game. Riley had moved out of their shared apartment several months earlier, ostensibly to pursue new opportunities but realistically because her manipulation tactics had backfired spectacularly and she'd lost several mutual friends who recognized her behavior patterns for what they really were: the actions of someone who couldn't handle not being the center of attention in every social situation. According to Sage, Riley had struggled to find roommates who would tolerate her dramatic tendencies and constant need for emotional support, cycling through several living situations before finally settling into a studio apartment that she could afford on her marketing salary but that isolated her from the social network she'd previously relied upon for validation and attention. She'd made increasingly desperate attempts to reconnect with old friends who had grown tired of her victim narratives and emotional manipulation, discovering that most people had limited patience for someone who created drama wherever she went and refused to take responsibility for her own actions and choices. Riley made one final attempt to disrupt our engagement party by sending a lengthy email to both Sage and me, claiming she deserved an apology for being led on and manipulated throughout our friendship, despite being the person who had systematically sent mixed signals while denying any romantic interest when directly confronted about her intentions. The email was a masterpiece of projection and revisionist history, painting herself as an innocent victim who had been cruelly deceived by two people she trusted, while completely ignoring her own role in creating the confusion and conflict that had damaged multiple relationships and friendships. She claimed that I had pursued her romantically for months while pretending to respect friendship boundaries, and that Sage had betrayed their friendship by choosing to date someone who was obviously emotionally unavailable and incapable of honest communication with women. According to Riley's final narrative, she was the mature, rational person who had tried to maintain appropriate boundaries while being systematically manipulated by two people who had coordinated their efforts to isolate her from her support network and steal her emotional security. Rather than engaging with Riley's desperate attempt to restart the drama and conflict that had characterized our interactions for months, Sage and I forwarded the email to our wedding planner as an example of people not to invite, treating it with the humor it deserved rather than giving Riley the emotional reaction she was still desperately seeking even after all this time. We laughed about the absurdity of someone demanding an apology for being respected exactly as they had requested, and marveled at Riley's continued inability to understand that actions have consequences and that treating people poorly eventually leads to isolation and loneliness. Our wedding planner found the entire situation both entertaining and instructive, commenting that she'd seen similar patterns in other weddings where former friends or partners tried to insert themselves into celebrations they hadn't been invited to participate in because they couldn't accept that their behavior had consequences. Riley eventually started therapy and began dating someone new, finally learning to respect the boundaries she claimed to want, while Sage and I built our relationship on the foundation of mutual respect and clear communication that had attracted us to each other in the first place. According to mutual friends who occasionally updated us on her progress, Riley had slowly begun to understand how her manipulation tactics and victim narratives had damaged her relationships, though it took months of professional counseling for her to recognize patterns she'd been repeating in multiple friendships and romantic situations throughout her adult life. The last I heard, she was making genuine efforts to change her communication style and take responsibility for her actions, though I remained skeptical about whether someone who had been so committed to manipulation and emotional games could truly develop the self-awareness and maturity required for healthy relationships with others.